Ex Cosmographia Universalis Sebastiani Munsterii, hac ecroama erit de capita sexgintonum, quali status et forma regimis fuerit ab antiquo in Italia sub regibus, consulibus et imperatoribus. Quae perunt monarchiae ut plurimum ab exiguis initiis, gradatim quad sumum ascenderunt apicem, et deinde russum descrescentes, sensim in arctos deviderunt fines, quarerum vicissitudine monemur in constantia eorum quae fiunt in terris. Tale incrementum et itidem decrementum habuit olim prima monarchia Babylonica, sub Nimrod fortissimo venatore, et postea sub filio eius bello, atque nepote Nino, sub quibus vehementur crevit, sed tandem cum ad summum pervenisset curvit. Duravit autem annis millesimo duodentesimo tridentaquatur, et deinde scisast in Babyloniam et Mediam. Mediae annumerat hast Persia. Diviso huius monarchiae duravit annis 34, deinde sub Dario et Kyro Russum instaurat hast monarchia duravitque annis 191. Superveniente autem Alexandro Magno defecit et ipsa. Paulo postque perunt Romani extendere poemoria regni sui, paulatimque obtinuerunt summum orbis dominium. Sunt tamen qui aliter locuuntur de his monarchiis mundi, nempe quod fuerint quatur. Prima fuit in Assyria duravitque annis millesimo trecentesimo. Deinde translata ad Medos, mansit apud eos aliquot annis, tertia exhortast in Persia sub rege Kyro, vel potios ut alii dicunt, altera translatast, ad reges Mediae et Persiae. Tertia fuit apud Graecos, et quarta nitium sumpsit sub Iulio Caesarae Romano, crevitque vehementur sub Augusto so cessore eius. Cumque trecentis fere annis in Italia constitisset, translatast per Constantinum ad Graeciam, ut infra sua loco explicabitur. His obiter commemoratis iam Russum calamum vertemus ad Romulum, urbis Romae conditorem. Et quamvis ante eum multi reges in Italia fuerint, sex scilicit Latini, quorum nomina sunt Ianus, Saturnus, Picus, Faunus, Latinus, Aeneas, et quindecim reges Albani, quorum primus catus est Ascanius, penultimus Amulius, et ultimus Numitor. Relictis tamen illis, ex ordium faciamos a Romulo, qui primus Romanorum fuit rex atque una cum remo Roma extruxit, vel ut alii scribunt, urbin queptam ampliavit, fermioremque redidit, annos gelicet ante Christi nativitatem 63. Duravit autem illud eius et suorum successorum regnum annis 250 quad annum ante Christi natalem 50 Tunc dominatus conversus est in tyrannidem. Id circo exclusis regibus crearunt Romani duos consules, penes quos omnis erat autoritas, isque regimis status duravit multis annis, nempe ad annum ante Christi incarnationem 48. Tunc Caesares usurparunt imperii gubernaculum. Fuerunt autem ante consules 7 reges, sibi in vicem succedentes, inter quos primus fuit Romulus, secundus Numa Pompilius, tertius Tullius Hostilius, et cetera. Septimus Lucius Tarquinius, qui propter superbiam et tyrannidem suam destitutus fuit regno. Hoc eodam tempore Sextus eius filius Maximus natu, missus ab eo in urbem, quae colatia vocabatur, ob negotium quedam militare divertit ad cognitam suum Lucium Tarquinium, colatinum cognomine, quis uxorarat foemina Romana pulcherrima, filia Lucretii illustris vidi, quae et eundum tamquam vidis sui cognatum hospitio excepit. At ille cum conaretur eius corrumpere pudicitiam, putaretque senactum commodissimiam occasionem, abiens post coenam dormitum et magnam partem expectans noctis surget et vadit ad cubiculum dormientis iam Lucretiae, minaturque se eam occisurum. Se vel fugere vel emittere vocem conaretur, et duorum illi proponet electionem. Mortem scilicet cum de decore aut vitam cum felicitate. Si, inquam enitare subsistere, se vare volens pudicitiam, ego te occitam. Famulumque unum mactans, poenam simul vestra corporat dicam, quod indicenter te in complexus servi deprehenderim, et injuriamque cognati persecutus fuerim. Isque minis elegantem foeminam in hanc adegit necessitatem, ut stuprum violentum intolerit, exhortoque diet nefario desiderio expleto abierit. Lucretia vero acerbissime ferens hunc casum celerrima ascendens vehiculum Romam venit. Veste induta nigret absconso sub stola cultro, ingressaque domum patris et genua eius complectens. Iuberat vocare admicos et cognatos, ut illis exponat gravem et interabilem conturmeliam sibi ilatam. Collectisque amicis et cognatis narrat eis remomnem et calmitatem, a principium incipiens, poste aquat salutans patrem, multasque ei preces et eis qui aderant ad hibens, ne in ultum facinus relinquerent, ac deinde diis laribusque supplicans celerem daris sibi migrationem evita educit cultrum, quem sub paludamentis occultaverat. Ne, inquiens foemina adulterium admissurae excusationes velamena me suscipiant, dicentes. Lucretia quoque tali quid admissit, unum vulnus pectori inferens trudit usquad cor gladium. Clamor autem et luctu et comploratione muliebri domum omnem detinente. Ipsen gremio patris palpitans, e flans quanimam moritur. Assistentibus autem Romanis, adiat rox visum est hoc facinus et miserabile, ut una fuerit vox omnium. Mori milies esse melius pro libertate, quam huius modi contur melius a tyrannis negligere. Veniens autem colatinus maritus eius, et miserabile spectaculin pro patulo iacens corpus scilicit sanguine conspersum, videns alte gemit, complectitur et osculatur mortuam Lucretiam, alloque baturque ut viventem. Quod videns Lucius Iunius cognamento Brutus dixit, in numera habes tu et cuncti amici tui tempora, per quae ipsam defleatis, at nunc ipsam ut ulciscamur consideremus, hoc enim tempus praesens poscit. Cuius consilio a tota urbe obtemperatumst. Exclusus enim Tarquinius a regno, creati sunt in locum eius duo consules et senatus, et in ea administratione mansit res publica Romanorum annis quatur centesimo sexquinto, crevitque dominium eorum supramodum. Et cum postea Russum admitterent reges et imperatores, imminitum est sensum imperium ipsum. habuerunt consules regiam et summam potestatem, fueruntque primi et summi duces in exercitu, et ab eorum officioatque consulato sub putatio fiebat anorum. Primi duo consules vocati sunt Lucius Junius Brutus et Lucius Collatinus. Prior eiecit collegam suum Lucium Collatinum, qui fuit de genere tarquin orum et maritus Lucretiae, et in locum eius delectus Marcus Valerius. Brutus vero qui regium dominatium expulit et primus creatus fuit consul, brevi temporean ea floruit dignitate. Namcum dux esset exercitus contra eos qui Tarquinia adharebant, confossus Lancia interit. Horum primorum consulum temporibus tribuni sunt quoque constituti, atque cum maior ingruet necessitas, creaverunt et dictatorum, pennes quem summa erat potestas in populum, durabatque solum per sex menses. Erat extraordinarius magistratus, quius tanta erat potestas, ut haberet ius animat vertendi in quius cumque civis Romani caput. Nec ab eo provocandi eius erat. Nec alio pacto creari solebat, quamcum vis aliqua maiore repente oporta in gentem urbi clamen militari videretur. Fuit autem ad eam dignitatem per gradusa quaestura census, per aedilitatem, praeturam, consulatum et censuram. Sed in dignitate potestateque hic erat ordo, ut in re bellica certi militiae gradus. Miles centurione parebat, centurio tribuno, tribunus legato, legatus consuli, magister equitum dictatori. Legitima malitia decenium habuit, sinon prius delebari cum hoste contigisit, aut missio aliqua intercidisset. Militaris aetas ad decem septimo anno in octavum et quadragesimum decurrebat. Cubitatis aut sociae, aut coloniae, aut municipiae decebantur. Municipius aliis vicinias cum suffragio data, aliis sine suffragio. Colini ut membrum cubitatis erant, et Romanis vivebant legibus, municipies suis. In his decuriones erant quod Romae senatores. Purpura patritium distinguebat ordinab equestri, aurum equestres a plebis. Haec officia et hic status regimis Romanorum duraverunt usquad annum ante Christum natum quagint octum, et interim Romani supra modum extenderunt potestatem suam, subicientes dirionis suae multae regna et provincias, non solum in Europa, verum et in Africa atque in Asia. Domuerunt potentissimam illam Africae urbem Carthaginem, cum illa Romae aequalis esse contenderet, aut illam exceder in potentia, cum ad modum infra suo loco dicetur. Anno quinginti octo ante Christum natum, factus et Romae Julius dictator, habens scilicet summam potestatem et postea missus est contra Germanos, ut illos praeliis perdomaret. Veniens ergo cum exercitu ad Rhenum, subegit omnes civitates quas in ripa occidentali inventi. Extruxit quoquad Rhenum arcis et firma praesidiatque duos pontes, unum apud ubius, quo hodie sunt colonienses, ad alteram apud Menapius, hoc est Geldrensis. Ut scilicet illi pateret iter ad debellandum Germanos, etiam si parum proficeret suis incursionibus apud illos. Cumque in decinum annum expeditionem illan produxisset, reversus est Romam cum magna potentia, usurpavitque omnem urbis potestatem, etiam contra Romanorum voluntatem, sed magno commoda eorum et sine subditorum ullo dispendio. invidentes autem quidam Romanorum hanc potestatem conspirationemque facientes occiderunt eium. Ipsa fuit primus Caesar, aqua omnes Caesares id nominis habent. Appellatus est autem Caesar, non ratione officii aut potestatis quem habuit, sed ob huius modi eventum, quod mortua matre et Caeso eius utero natus sit. Alii vero alias afferunt rationes negantes matrem eius in puerperio Caesam cum matrem Aureliam habuerit, quam ammisit eo tempore quando bellum in Gallia gesit. Hic omnem Galliam novem annis in provinciae formam redegit. Germanos quoque qui trans Rhenum habitant, primus Romanorum fabricato ponte agressus claribus afficere sategit. Agressus est et Britannos ante ignotos superavitque. In Macedonia vicit Pompeium cum Ptolemaio rege. In Ponto superavit Mithridatem, in Africa Scipionem, et in Hispania liberos Pompei. Triumphavit quinquies, primum de Gallia, postea de Alexandria, deinde de Ponto, de Africa et de Hispania. Noluit vocari rex, sciens Romanis ab antiquo tempore nomen regis esse in visum. Perpetuus vero dictatora pallari voluit, quod nomen apud posteros Caesares commutatum stin vocam imperatoris. Constituto itaque imperio in Italia usquad Constantinum magnum, nempe ad annum Christi trecentum fuit inde translatum in Graeciam, et factum est Byzantium sedes imperialis, dictaquist urbs illa ad Constantino instauratore eius Constantinopolis. Mansit autem ibi sedes imperialis ad annos fere quadringentos, antequam Aquilia biceps efficeretur, id quod factum est anno salutis septingentissex, quando Carolus Magnus in ecclesia occidentali imperialem obtinuit dignitatem, Graecis orientalem conservantibus imperatorem. Ante vero hunc Carolum Magnum licet, imperatores Constantinopoli residerent, habuerunt nihilo minus in occidente imperii administrationem, quam exequebantur vel per se, vel per alium sibi, vel sanguine, vel affinitate iunctum, quam et Caesarum creebant, et stratus regimis duravit usquad Valentiniarum tertium. Dicarunt autem Romani Aquilam pro signo legionibus suis militaribus, sub Caio Mario consule, in secundo eius consulatu, ut scilicet hoc signo eius adderent animum, quo fidentius agrederentur hostem, sicut Aquila intrepide irruit in cervos et dracones, ut supra quoque ostendimus, porro ut scias quod Caesares et qui in Italia imperio praefuerint, ponam nunc ordine nomine orum, atque recensebo cathalogum secundum successioneorum. From the Universal Cosmography of Sebastian Munster, this is chapter 61. What of the state and form of government in Italy from ancient times under the kings, consuls, and emperors? Monarchies, for the most part, began from humble beginnings, gradually rose to their highest peak, and then, again decreasing, would gradually reach narrow limits, by which change of events we are reminded of the constancy of what happens on earth. Such was the growth, and likewise the decrease of the first Babylonian monarchy, under Nimrod, the most valiant hunter, and after under his son Belus and grandson Ninus, under whom it grew greatly, but at length, when it had reached its peak, it again fell. Having lasted 1,234 years, then it was divided into Babylonia and Media. The kingdom of Media was renamed Persia, and the division of this monarchy lasted some 304 years. Then, under Darius and Cyrus, the Persian monarchy was re-established, lasting 191 years. But with the arrival of Alexander the Great, this too failed. Shortly afterwards, the Romans began to extend the borders of their own kingdom, gradually obtaining supreme dominion over the world. There are, however, those who speak differently about these monarchies of the world, namely that there were four, the first being in Assyria, lasting 1,300 years. Then, having been transferred to the Medes, it remained with them for some years. The third arose in Persia under King Cyrus, or rather, as some say, the second was transferred to the kings of Media and Persia. The third was among the Greeks, and the fourth began under Julius Caesar the Roman, and grew greatly under Augustus his successor. And when it had remained in Italy for nearly 300 years, it was transferred by Constantine to Greece, as will be explained in its proper place, in the pages below. Having mentioned these first things in passing, we will now turn our attention once more to Romulus, the founder of the city of Rome. And although before him there were many kings in Italy, namely 6 Latins, whose names are Janus, Saturnus, Picus, Faunus, Latinus, Aeneas, and the 15 Alban kings, of whom the first was called Ascanius, the penultimate Amulius, and the very last Numitor. Nevertheless, leaving these behind, we will begin with Romulus, who was the first king of the Romans, and together with Remus, he built Rome. Or, as others write, he enlarged the city that had been begun and made it stronger, namely in the year 730 before the birth of Christ. Now that reign of him and his successors lasting for 250 years, until the year 513 before the birth of Christ. Then the rule was transferred into tyranny, and after the kings were excluded from the inner circle, the Romans created 2 consuls, in whose hands all authority was rested, and that state of government lasted for many years thereafter, namely until the year 48 before the incarnation of Christ, when the Caesars first usurped the reins of the empire. Now before the consuls there were 7 kings, succeeding one another, among whom the very first was Romulus, the second Numa Pompilius, the third Tullius Hostilius, and so on. The 7th was Lucius Tarquinius, who, because of his pride and tyranny, was deprived of the kingdom. At the very same time his eldest son Sextus, sent by him to the city called Collatia on some military business, turned aside to his kinsman Lucius Tarquinius, surnamed Collatinus, whose wife was a very beautiful Roman woman, the daughter of the illustrious man Lucretius, who also received him as her husband's kinsman as a guest. But when he tried to corrupt her chastity, and thought he had found a very convenient opportunity, he went to sleep after supper, and he waited a large part of the night. Then he rose and went to the bedroom of Lucretia, who was already asleep, and he threatened that he would kill her if she tried to flee or uttered a word. And he offered her a choice of 2, namely, death with disgrace or life with happiness. "If," he said, "you try to resist me, wanting to preserve your chastity, I shall kill you, and having slaughtered one of your servants, I will place your bodies together, and say that I indecently caught you both in the embrace, and that I have pursued the wrong done to your husband." And with these threats he drove the elegant woman to the necessity, so that she received his violent act, and he, having fulfilled his desire, departed the next day. But Lucretia, bearing this misfortune with great bitterness, quickly mounted her carriage and came to Rome, dressed in black, with a knife hidden beneath her cloak. She entered her husband's house, and, embracing his knees, she ordered his friends and relatives to be summoned, so that she might explain to them the grave and intolerable insult inflicted on her. With friends and relatives gathered, she tells them the whole story and calamity from the very beginning. Then, imploring her father, making many prayers to him and those present, that they would not leave the crime unpunished. Then, praying to the gods and the guardians that she might be granted a speedy departure from life, she took out the knife that she'd hidden under her waist. Lest, she said, women who are about to commit adultery take from me any veil of excuse. So they say. Lucretia also admitted something similar, inflicting a single wound to the center of her chest, thrusting the knife right through her heart. But with the cries, the mourning, and the lamentations of the women holding the entire house, she herself, panting in her father's lap, she breathed her last and expired. But to the rest of the Romans present, this crime seemed so atrocious and miserable that everyone unanimously agreed that it was better to die 1,000 times for freedom than to ignore such insults from tyrants. But her husband, Collatinus, arriving back and seeing the pitiful sight of her lying in the open field, namely her body covered in blood, he groaned deeply and embraced and kissed the dead Lucretia, and spoke to her as if she were alive. Seeing this sight, Lucius Junius, surnamed Brutus, he said, "You and all your friends have countless times during which to mourn her, but now let us consider her in order to avenge ourselves, for this is what the present time demands." His advice was obeyed by the entire city. For Tarquinius being excluded from the kingdom, 2 consuls and a new senate were elected in his place, and under that administration the Roman Republic remained for 460 years, and their dominion grew beyond measure. And when later they again admitted kings and emperors, the empire itself was gradually diminished. The consuls had royal and supreme power, and they were the first and highest commanders in the army, and the years were counted from their office and consulship. The first 2 consuls chosen were Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucius Collatinus. The former expelled his colleague Lucius Collatinus, who was of the Tarquinium family and the husband of Lucretia, and Marcus Valerius was chosen in his place. But Brutus, who expelled the kingly rule and was the first to be named consul, he flourished in that dignity for but a short time. For while he was the leader of the army against those who adhered to Tarquinius, he was pierced with a lance and died. During the time of these first consuls, the tribunes were also constituted, and when greater necessity arose, they also named a dictator, in whose hands was the greatest power over the people. But this office lasted only 6 months. This was an extraordinary magistrate, whose power was so great that he had the right to take the head of any Roman citizen, nor was he entitled to be challenged by any. He was not usually named except when some great force suddenly arose and seemed to threaten the city with great disaster. But there was a gradual approach to that level of dignitas, from the quaestor through aedileship, praetorship, consulship, and censorship. Not that one always went through each degree and had to fill the number, but there was this order in dignitas, and power, as in war. A soldier was subordinate to a centurion to a tribune to a legate to a consul, and a master knight to a dictator. The term of service was for 10 years, unless the soldier had engaged in battle with the enemy, or might be interrupted by some mission. The military age ran from the 17th year to the 48th. Cities were either allies, or colonies, or municipalities. To municipalities, some were given the right to vote, others were not. Colonies were members of the Commonwealth and lived by Roman laws. Municipalities lived by their own. Among these were the decurions, which were the first senators of Rome. The purple distinguished the patrician order from the equestrian, the gold the equestrian from the plebeians. These offices and this state of Roman government lasted until the year 48 before Christ, and in the meantime the Romans extended their power beyond measure, subjecting many kingdoms and provinces to their rule, not only in Europe, but also in Africa and Asia. They subdued the most powerful city of Africa, Carthage, when it was contending to be equal to Rome or to surpass her in power, as will be said below in its proper place. In the year 58 before Christ, Julius was made dictator at Rome, having, of course, the supreme power, and afterwards he was sent against the Germans to subdue them in battle. Coming therefore with an army to the Rhine, he subdued all the cities which he had found on the western bank. He built also castles and strong garrisons on the Rhine, and 2 bridges, one at the Ubii, where Cologne is today, and the other at the Menapii, that is, the Geldernese, so that the way might be open to him to conquer the Germans, even if he made little practical progress in any of his incursions against them. And when he had carried out that expedition into the 10th year, he returned to Rome with great power, and usurped all power in the city, even against the will of the Romans, but to their great advantage without any loss to his subjects. But some Romans, envying him this power and forming a conspiracy, they killed him. He was the first Caesar, from whom all later Caesars took their name. But he was named Caesar not by reason of the office or power which he held, but because of such an event that he was born of a dead mother, her womb being cut open. Others, however, denying that his mother was killed in childbirth, since he had a living mother, Aurelia, whom he lost at the time he was waging war in Gaul. He reduced all of Gaul to the form of a province in 9 years. He also attacked the Germans who lived beyond the Rhine, having first built a bridge for the Romans and endeavored to inflict disasters on them. He also attacked and defeated the previously unknown Britons. In Macedonia he defeated Pompey and King Ptolemy. In the Pontus he defeated Mithridates, in Africa Scipio, and in Spain the sons of Pompey. He triumphed 5 times, first over Gaul, then over Alexandria, then over Pontus, Africa, and Spain. He did not wish to be called king, knowing that the name of king had been hated by the Romans from ancient times. He wished to be called the perpetual dictator, which name was changed among the later Caesars to the word emperor. And so, having established an empire in Italy until the time of Constantine the Great, namely in the year 330 after Christ, it was transferred from there to Greece, and Byzantium became the imperial seat, and that city was called Constantinople by Constantine, its founder. The imperial seat remained there for nearly 400 years before the 2-headed eagle was made, which happened in the year of salvation 776, when Charlemagne, in the western extremity, obtained imperial dignity, while the Greeks retained their eastern emperor. Before this, Charles the Great, Charlemagne, although the emperors resided in Constantinople, they nevertheless had an administration of the empire in the west, which they carried out either by themselves or through another connected to them, either by blood or kinship, for which they also named Caesar. And this layer of government lasted until Valentinian III. Now the Romans gave the eagle as a sign to their military legions, under the consulship of Gaius Marius, in his second consulship, namely, that by that sign they might increase their courage, so that they might more confidently attack the enemy, just as the eagle fearlessly rushes upon deer and dragons, as we have shown above. Furthermore, that you may know that the Caesars and those who have ruled in Italy, I will now place their names in appropriate order, and I will list them in the following catalogue according to their succession.